Dear viewer, have you killed anyone? Don't bother answering because your response does not matter. You can be the butcher of hundreds or be the most virtuous humanitarian, as long as people view you in that light. Because in the games that run our world, from the politics of nations to the dealings of corporations to the policies in education, perception is everything. Therefore, if you change the way people view the world, you change the game. And it's the manipulation of perception that creates glorious triumph and bitter tragedy in the situation known as the Iran hostage crisis. On November 4, 1979, Iranian students took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran to protest the admission of the Shah into the U.S., capturing a total of 66 American citizens. After 14 of them were released, the remaining 52 were held hostage for 444 days. In order to understand the triumphs and tragedies of this crisis and the significance of perception, we need to consider the motivations of the Iranians who conducted the operation. Two of their major demands were an apology from the U.S. for its involvement in Iran's internal affairs, and that Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the deposed ruler of Iran, be returned to his country to face trial. However, they raise another question. What did the US government do in Iran that fueled this much resentment? To answer this question and determine the consequences of US involvement, we must go back to the 19th century. Iran, formerly known as Persia, was once one of the greatest empires in the world, its culture and influence stretching back for centuries. However, when its empire began to decline, the vultures began to circle. In 1813, Iran ceded the Caucasus to Russia after the Russo-Persian War that began in 1804. In 1872, Iran gave nearly complete control over its resources, industry, and infrastructure to a British company. However, public outrage eventually caused the concession to be cancelled. In the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907, Russia and Britain divided the country among their spheres of influence without the input of any Iranian representative. Iran, despite its attempts to free itself, was a puppet of imperial powers. However, in 1951, hope had emerged for Iran's future. Mohammad Mossadegh was appointed as Iran's prime minister, and the nationalization of Iran's oil industry, a measure which he supported, was passed by Iran's parliament shortly before he entered office. The nation also underwent a process of democratization as the monarchy began to lose control and influence to the prime minister. After numerous concessions, Iran was finally standing up to foreign powers. However, the nationalization of Iran's oil industry was a move that, although massively popular among Iranians, displeased the British Lion who had begun to conspire with the US to maintain its empire. The initial coup staged by the CIA and MI6 failed, and the Shah, who had supported the coup, fled the country. Despite the initial setback, a second attempt succeeded in toppling Mossadegh from office, allowing the Shah to return and seize power. Iran's chance to determine its own fate, after generations of foreign influence, was lost. The US had denied Iran a chance at democracy and established an autocratic regime, transforming the way the Iranians perceived it. Its actions in 1953 fueled the resentment present in 1979. To the hostage takers, the perception of the US as a bastion of democracy is a fraud. This animosity towards the United States and the Shah was reinforced by the White Revolution, an ambitious set of reforms ratified in 1963 that were meant to modernize Iran and strengthen the Shah's political power. Large areas of land belonging to landlords were acquired by the government and redistributed among approximately 2.5 million families in an attempt to garner support from the rural population. In this regard, it was unsuccessful, and no real support for the Shah emerged from there. It did, however, incense the clergy, who actually supported the Shah in 1953. The reforms of the White Revolution threatened their finances, restrained their influence in education, and weakened their position in Iranian society. Women were given suffrage and the right to hold office, an act considered by some in the clergy to be a blatant violation of traditional Islamic values. It was clear the Shah was secularizing Iran. The clergy held the Shah in contempt for moving the country away from Shia Islam, while the secular intellectuals were resentful of the lack of democratic reforms. And although they were different, they have a common enemy. Speaking out against the Shah meant torture or death by his secret police, the Savak. an organization the US helped create. The US who also helped overthrow Mossadegh in 1953, who kept the Shah in power, who exploited their nation to serve its own interests. The ensuing Iranian Revolution and the Iran hostage crisis were the culmination of all this hatred that grew over generations of humiliation by foreign powers. To them, the Iran hostage crisis was an immense triumph. By capturing the US embassy and holding the Americans hostage, they have avenged their country in 1953 and established their independence from the corrupt influence of the West. The triumph, however, was short-lived for many.
The US. And the important thing is that, and I mean, this was one of the things that one of the guys, one of the hostage takers told me. He says, well, we find it useful to have this, to hold you guys hostage, because we're still trying to identify those people who are enemies of the revolution. And we can tell when somebody is an enemy of the revolution when they say that you guys should be freed. And so I'm thinking, wait, you're telling me that as soon as somebody on your side says, hey, maybe we ought to free the hostages, you round them up and put them in prison? I mean, if that's the case, you know, what's the scenario for me eventually getting out of here?
The hostage takers, who called themselves the Muslim students of the Imam Khomeini line, used the hostages as a political weapon to eliminate their rivals and establish their legitimacy. In the end, the moderates and the leftists were removed of their authority and influence, leaving the theocrats dominant in the political arena. The hostage crisis in 1979, despite the resentment present in the Iranians, was not inevitable. You see, perception is everything. Perception can turn honest angels into conniving devils and make small threats appear apocalyptic, as long as there are players willing to manipulate the facts and fools willing to believe them. When Jimmy Carter, the US president during the crisis, was interviewed over why he accepted the Shah into the US, he said the following: I was told that the Shah was desperately ill, at the point of death. I was told that New York was the only medical facility that was capable of possibly saving his life, and reminded that the Iranian officials had promised to protect our people in Iran. When all the circumstances were described to me, I agreed. However, according to one of the Shah's doctors, the Shah didn't need to go to New York, nor was he at the point of death. Carter's perception of the situation had diverged from reality. As a result, the choices made by him and his administration contributed heavily to the development of the hostage crisis, a crisis which saw the failure of a rescue mission leading to the deaths of 8 American servicemen, a crisis which saw Carter lose the presidential election to Ronald Reagan, a crisis which led to a war between Iran and Iraq, killing hundreds of thousands. And it's their fault. This is the tragedy of the Iran hostage crisis. Yes, there are people who are responsible. Yes, there are actions that are inexcusable, but they are also human, who are part of a game they have little control over. Consider the following. Anyone can say they want to help a poor, starving child on the other side of the world, and that feeling can be genuine. But when asked if they would give up their devices to help that child, after much hesitation, the answer is probably no. And let's go back to 1953. To the coup that impacted so many. It's easy to blame the US and British governments for enacting the coup, but in order to stay in power, politicians must keep their voters and large donors happy, who may like to help the people of an impoverished country, but may not necessarily want to give up their oil. The Iranians, who were depicted as irrational people who blindly worshipped Ayatollah Khomeini, were human beings who wanted justice for all the injustice their country has suffered. That's the tragedy of the Iran hostage crisis, the perception people have of the world as a place where there is always someone or something to blame, and a simple explanation to go along with it. Three-dimensional individuals are reduced to two-dimensional puppets, and they are the ones who suffer the consequences. It is those who control the narrative who will triumph, and as Jimmy Carter once told Ted Koppel, former host of Nightline, there are only 2 people who really benefited from the hostage crisis. One was the Ayatollah Khomeini, and the other one was you.